There are moments in life when the story we thought we were going to live suddenly changes. Sometimes it happens slowly through quiet disappointments and unanswered prayers. Other times it arrives all at once, forcing us to face questions we never expected to ask. Welcome to the It's Your Story to Tell podcast. I'm your host, Megan Babcock. On this podcast, we talk honestly about the moments that shape our lives, the pain, the surrender, the healing, and how those experiences can become the very thing that prepares us to live with deeper purpose and impact. My guest today is Ashley Hopkins. And before Ashley ever became a mother, she walked through a deep crisis of faith where she had to face the painful possibility that she might never have children at all. It was a season that forced her to wrestle with God, her expectations for life, and what it really means to surrender control. Ashley, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I'm going to let you tell our audience a little bit about that wrestling with your faith and eventually how it prepared you for what you never thought you would have to deal with.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Megan. Yeah, it's been looking back, there's been a lot more hindsight is 2020, right? God has really been doing a lot of groundwork in my life. I grew up Christian and I think I thought I went through some hard things in college and thought that, hey, I'm hanging on to my faith and it's all good. I'm in a good place. Boy, I did not know. But in my early 20s, I learned a little more about God and sovereignty and all these things that I'd never really wrestled with growing up in church. And it led me through a real crisis of faith. And I really struggled for a long, long time because I couldn't understand the God that I thought I knew and how this reconciled with a loving God. And so I really struggled for a long time to feel close to God, to find joy in my faith and all these things. What I really ended up with was, you know what, no matter how angry I am, where else am I going to go? Lived in California at the time. I was really surrounded by a lot of the world and worldly people. And it was very evident to me that whatever hangups I have with God, I just have to work them out with Him because running away, there's nothing else to go to. Like Peter said, where else are we going to go? And so I think that really helped me realize, okay, this is hard, but we're going to figure it out. Much like marriage, right? We got to figure it out. So I think that really prepared me for what was going to come in my future. I got married young, but we didn't have kids for a long time just because of life circumstances. When my daughter was born, it was the best thing ever. It was just super exciting. And unexpectedly, she was born a little premature. And so we spent a few weeks in the NICU, which at the time I thought was the world ending, which, I mean, it's your first little baby. You have to leave there. I mean, it kind of does feel like that. I think that was
Mhm.
reasonable. But she was there for under 3 weeks. And I thought that felt like a lifetime. Well, that was God priming me for when my son was born, unexpectedly conceived, like surprise. He was born very, very early. We didn't know anything was wrong with the pregnancy at the time. I just remember feeling like, ooh, I feel like I'm ready to pop. And I'm only in my second trimester. This just feels really crazy. And finally, my OB said, okay, let's just do a scan and see what's going on. You're probably just I don't know, big, but let's figure out what's going on. And before we could even make it to that scan, my son was born at less than 30 weeks. When he was born, he wasn't really struggled to breathe on his own. So it was C-section with my daughter, C-section with my son, which is its own little thing, right? As a mom, you're getting robbed of all those things, all those moments that you hoped to have and planned for throughout the pregnancy. So that was really hard. A lot of God, this is not what I wanted. Why are you depriving me of this? And lots of little judgments I had against God. He was in the NICU and we knew he would be there for a while because of how early he was. And a lot of his initial struggles, the doctors, I think they were probably trying to make us feel better. And we just chalked it off to, well, he's just really early. Let's give him some time. We didn't even have time to give him the 2 shots of steroids for his lung development, right? So, okay, he's struggling to breathe. It's kind of expected. But eventually we realized and they realized there's more happening here than that. And so we got some genetic testing done and found out that he had a genetic condition called myotubular myopathy, which essentially is just global hypotonia, so very low muscle tone. And so he could not breathe on his own, could not swallow, wouldn't be able to sit or stand or anything like that. I mean, even though we live near a very big children's hospital, MTM is rare enough that they weren't super familiar with it. And so a lot of the prognosis we got was very dark. The literature that was out on the condition at the time was very outdated, and it was horrible. It said, maybe he'll make it to 18 months. If he makes it past 18 months, maybe he'll make it to 10 years old. You don't really know. It was really hard to know what to think in those days. I think the doctors didn't really want to say, but they seemed to imply, well, he might not make it out of the NICU. We don't really know. What do you guys want to do? And so there were a lot of, I think, hard things to accept, hard decisions we had to make. Thankfully, there is a huge, strong community of parents that provided a lot of information to us. There's a foundation that gave us a lot of medical knowledge. And so it was a lot of talking to the doctors about, like, this is actually what the literature says, and which for them was like, that doesn't make any sense. We're going to do what makes sense here, which, you have a baby's life in your hands. So there was a lot on multiple fronts. There was a lot to deal with, and it felt overwhelming. And of course, we had our daughter as well who needed attention. And then I had to go back to work. His NICU stay went past maternity leave. So that was really hard. I had whole days I had to go without even seeing my son at all, which felt like torture. So there was a lot there. While he was in the NICU, still kind of those early days, not knowing what was going to happen, I remember thinking, I think I have to accept the fact that it's possible he might not make it out of the NICU. And I talk about this in my podcast, but I remember like one particular night after we came back from the NICU, standing in the shower and just like sobbing this, like I didn't have words, but it was just like very visceral, like, God, I don't really want to live in a world where my son's not here, which was crazy because I have my daughter to live for. And and my husband, just we have a lot to live for. But when you're in the middle of that kind of pain, right, there's not really a lot of higher processing. It's just like, I can't even think about this pain right now. So that was really hard. And it was a lot of just, God, like, why are we not good enough Christians? Like, why are you putting us through this? And I remember one of the drives back home from the NICU, my husband and I were talking about, like, why would we be going through something this hard? And, he said in his wisdom, like, sometimes even though we have good faith, sometimes it's really just need to walk it out.
What if your breakthrough wasn't found in striving, but in walking? What if clarity, healing, and direction came not in the hustle, but in quiet, intentional steps led by the Spirit? Sacred Pathways is a monthly walking mentorship designed to align your body, soul, and spirit with the wisdom of God. Each month, you'll receive 12 walking lessons. These are short teachings designed to be experienced on the move. You'll also get one live group session and access to a community of women committed to walking in purpose. This is more than a routine. It's a rhythm of renewal, a sacred invitation to process life with God, one step at a time. If you're hungry for deeper intimacy with the Lord, clarity in your calling, and healing that moves through your whole being, this is your path. Join Sacred Pathways and start walking in wisdom today. Now enrolling on itsyourstorytotell.com.
That's really important too. And I think that's something that I've really discovered is the power of having to walk out your faith. It's not just good for other people to see and for you to see your faith, but I think it's also just the ways that God can meet you in those moments is very different from how he meets you in everyday life when things are medium hard or small hard. Because you're much more vulnerable, you're much more raw, and God's love, it's so profound and deep, but I think it's really hard to understand its impact and taste it when we think we're okay. When we have our like barriers up still and we think that we're fine. But when you're just mush, you have nothing to stand on. That's, I think, when it becomes very clear. And so it really changed my relationship with God. Actually, rewinding a little bit, before my daughter was born, you had mentioned, right, I had to face the possibility that we would never have kids. It was just life circumstances. I thought things are never going to happen for us to be in a place to have kids. And I had wanted kids like since forever. And I remember the church that we attend now, we were attending there for the first time. And I had struggled with going to church up until then. And we were visiting, and hanging out with some of the people at church that first day after the service, and somebody just said, "Hey, let's just like talk about Jesus. We don't really talk about Jesus." And we were like, "Okay, what does that mean?" And so we all just sat in a circle with these strangers and to talk about Jesus. And it was so cool because everyone just kind of talked about like really big things came up with the circle of people that we didn't know very well. And so I said, this is like what we're going through. And I think maybe that it's not God's will for us to have kids. He never promised it to us just because I wanted. And so I think that that's okay. If that's what God has for us, then that's okay. And I finally got to that place. And then a few months later, my daughter was born. And I'm not saying that's what happens every time, but I think that was God really, like he said, I'm not going to give this to you because I really need to get you to this place first.
Mm.
Right. And I think that's what God has really shown me since then is a lot of, I'm not going to let this work out yet because you're not ready for it yet. So I think that was God laying the groundwork for everything that came after. And so, yeah, back to present day. So finally, 6 months later, our son came home and there was a lot of things to deal with then, which was a lot of like, now we have to have strangers in our home to help care for our son and, witnessing our everyday lives. So we were not the idea of having to rely on other people and rely on like we get our electricity goes off randomly. But now my son's on a ventilator. So like, how is that going to work? And that was terrifying. So we're just vulnerable in a lot more ways and that we had never planned on being vulnerable, and having to rely on people was really uncomfortable. Having to rely on people taking care of us was really uncomfortable. So God has really just made us do things that were really humbling, I guess is the
Mm.
word. And I think that I really needed that humbling. I think I didn't really realize it. And I think that pride can be very sneaky. It doesn't always look like arrogance and being out there. It's looking like I don't need other people's help. I'm the one that helps people. That sounds really good, but it's a kind of pride, thinking that we don't need other people's help and that we're not just like everybody else. Eventually, God led me to nurse coaching, which is a whole new struggling with being at work and not being home with my kids. And just with, I'm thinking as a nurse coach, right, struggling with mainstream medicine and how we're doing things. And so God brought me to nurse coaching, which has been amazing. And that opened me up to starting a podcast, which I would never in a million years have thought to do. One, because what do I have to say that people need to hear? I'm still in the thick of things, still figuring things out myself, but also opening up your life to other people was a line that I didn't know how to cross. It just felt so, I don't know, just like it feels like you're naked in front of people. And I think that having to cross that line by having people in our home, taking care of my son, I mean, even leaving him in the NICU in the hands of strangers, right? Just trusting that they would take care of him. I think he forced us to cross that line. And I think that was preparing me for this idea of doing a podcast. And even in the podcast, I think God has been doing a work, which is, I think it's more for me than for anybody else. He has used it to show me things and to grow me and force me to be in things. And so, yeah, just looking back, there's a lot of prep work and withholding until I think it's God really showing me what his priorities are, which is me and transforming me and deeper and more profound and significant relationship with him, which I think is his will for all of us. And the things that happen to get us there are awful sometimes, but I think our pride stands up so hard that unfortunately it takes really devastating things to get us to the place we need to get to really open up to God. So, yeah, and here we are today.
Well, thank you for walking through that because you were really able to share and show how God was working in you. And as somebody who's been on a similar journey, so many similarities when it comes to what was God trying to teach me. And I think a lot of times that's a really hard question to ask when you're in the midst of something so hard. Because when we're in a very hard situation, our nervous system can want to shut down or go into fight mode and protecting and controlling. And depending on the moment, I could do both. I was sometimes trying to fight my way through it. Sometimes I was so overwhelmed that I just didn't know what to do and would feel like just giving up. But where my story began to change was when I started asking the hard questions about, God, what is it that you are wanting to do in me? I think we all have these major things in our lives that happen that reveal to us where we get stuck. And then God wants, if we're willing, to reveal what do we need to do to unlock our new skills, a greater capacity to be able to go into that next level that He has for us. And it's really uncomfortable. And yet at the same time, that place of being uncomfortable is where you move into freedom if you don't shut down or you don't run from it and you get curious about it. I spent 2+ years in some really hard things with my daughter, and God showed me there were things that I was just not willing to let go of. And there were areas of obedience that I didn't want to walk in yet because I didn't think something was fair, or I wanted vengeance in a situation, which all of those things are not from God. And I had to wrestle with them. And so now I'm like, gosh, maybe if I had been more willing to surrender and obey, then I wouldn't have extended the period of pain. Now, I don't know if that would be true, right? Because you can't go back. But I do know that as I surrendered and allowed God to show me what He was doing, that even in the midst of the hard, I became more peaceful because I was no longer the one who was trying to control, fix, make this way. I was allowing God to, He told me, be still and know that I am God. And I do think, like you said, when we are in these moments of crisis, it really does reveal our faith. Because I thought, gosh, like I have this faith, I believe in God. And then when God starts taking away something or allowing something to be taken away, I think about Job's story and how he revealed that he really did trust God, even when God took away all of the things that were so important to him. And I had to get to that point where if my daughter wasn't in my life, was I going to choose to trust God and that He had a plan? And it sounds like that's kind of a similar place that you had to get to, where you were trusting God, where you don't know what the outcome is.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really transformative for me was, the first thing you want to do is ask why, right? Like intellectualize, what can we solve here? If there's nothing to solve right here, maybe it can solve the problem of like, why would God do this, right? But I think what I really had to learn was the answers don't actually matter. They'll be revealed in the right time, but they're not going to make me feel better. They're not going to help me grow my faith. What I really needed to experience, which again, it's hard to experience when things are relatively comfortable, was God's presence, which sounds like a very nebulous thing, but it's so much more tangible when you need it really badly, right? It's going to Him and experiencing what that's actually like and that supernatural peace that He can give you when it doesn't make sense. It's like I'm not working myself up into a peace or a trust. It's just something that God has been providing and teaching me. And so leaning into that for a while and like I had to put a pause on seeking answers and instead just like be in worship, right? Dwell in His bigness and His wisdom. And that's what He does for Job, right? God loved Job. He delighted in Job. And instead of giving him answers, He schooled him on like, do you understand, Job, how big I am, how wise I am, how ancient I am? Like, trust me. And I think that is really, really important for a number of reasons to not just know up here, but really embody. Right. I think you talk about this in your books, which is like your faith has to be more than intellectual. It has to be the way you respond naturally, the way your body responds when hard things happen. Right? When you feel yourself starting to panic and wanting to fix things, an embodied faith actually relaxes and just goes to God. And the Bible is full of people like Lamentations and the Psalms. There's so much of not complaining, but going to God with, God, this is not okay. This is bad. I am struggling here. And I think that at least I tended to be yelling at God and judging him and telling him how I thought it should be, or like ignoring him, stonewalling him. Those are my two responses. But instead, what we need to be doing, what I really learned was this is when you need to dig into engaging with God and not like, it's okay, God, I trust you, but like, just, it's fine. Like he can take even Naomi, like Naomi was, in the book of Ruth, like she was low, low, low. And she just cried out to God and said, God has made me his enemy. She was just letting him have it. But she still was faithful. And I think that can be a kind of hard thing to distinguish. How can we rail at God, but in a I still trust you, God way, right? But letting it all pour out without holding anything back. I think that's hard. I don't think we know how to lament very well. And I think that's something that I really had to learn. That's something that has really been life changing for me to know how to do that, to lead others in that, because I think I don't want to grieve and lose and be in pain for nothing. If this is life on this earth, like let's have it bring me closer to God. Let's, as you said, the next level of intimacy with God, because that's when we become powerful for the kingdom, right? If we're busy and distracted and everything is so, we're not really motivated to do much. But when when those other distractions are stripped away and we're much more courageous and willing, that's what happens when the hard things happen. And when God makes his realness and his bigness really known to us, is that courage and willingness to do things that I was not willing to do before comes up. And that's when we can be powerful for his kingdom. And I think that's what has happened in your life with all the work that you've done. And I think that's God has been working out in my life.
One of the things I really appreciate about Ashley's story is that it reminds us that God is often preparing us long before we understand why. The moments that you're walking in that feel confusing, painful, or even disappointing can become the very thing that strengthens your faith, expands your capacity, and moves you into the next level. Come back and join us as we talk about how this has shaped Ashley's calling and how God has placed big dreams on her heart to help others find freedom through surrender, obedience, and learning to take the next step in alignment with what matters most.